We noticed that there are many effective and useful aspects of thriller films that we can use in our media project, as well as some we can develop and change altogether. Firstly, I'm going to be looking at the music. At the start of our opening, when the camera is tracking up the stairs and into the room, plus during the film we have used music and sound effects. These are parallel to those associated with thriller, e.g. wind sound effects. However, we've adapted this music by putting a slow increasing heartbeat with it. We also made a group decision to use contrapuntal music, significantly country western. We all much preferred the contrapuntal because we observed it in other thriller films using this technique and believe it made the film unique. A point that I'm very proud of is where the music dips to a more echoed sound when the filter of the film changes and goes back to normal along with the film. I think that this was very well edited and I'm very happy with this section. However, I think that there were some minor changes to the editing of our music. For example, we had to cut a small section out at the very end to make our film fit in time. If I had the option to, I'd go back and make a smoother transition. The next aspect of the film I'm going to be looking at is the setting and location. We decided to film our location, specifically Shalford in Braintree. We used a bedroom attic above a garage. We were able to customise this space to make it look untidy and dirty, which we thought would be associated with our film scenario. The next area of filming is out in the countryside. We decided to use this location because we believed that it fits with some of the characteristics of a thriller film and that we've looked into for our inspiration. I also believe that the location logistics make sense as we filmed the opening sequence in a rural area. In contrast to this, might be considering using more built-up areas because I think that would be more common to drug dealers, like more urban. However, I think that we had a good overall location for our film. We also had a good continuity as well. The next aspect I'm going to be evaluating is the camera shots we used. I think that we used a good range of camera shots. For example, we used long take tracking shots and we also used a number of close-ups as well as long shots. However, I think that we could have used a few more types of shots to improve our film. However, after we finished filming, we realised that we actually had too much film and we had to cut a big portion of camera shots out that I would have liked to have used, e.g. a very long tracking shot, but unfortunately it was too long. However, I think that we included a large amount of interesting camera shots. It's made our film stand out, e.g. tracking shot into the bathroom was inspired by heat. We also did a lot of research into other thriller films to give us inspiration. Overall, again, I think that we used a good range of camera shots and we had good inspiration. The fourth aspect I'm going to be analysing is the mise-en-scène from the film. In our project we use a range of props, costumes and even makeup to make our film look realistic as possible. The first aspect I'm going to be evaluating is the makeup we used on our main character Stuart, played by Stuart Tanner. His makeup we decided to use was some dark eyeshadow under his eye to make him look like he has bags under them. Also some small darker lines to outline features on his face to give him a more battered look. We used them at the beginning of our film because the lighting allowed us to do this. However, we inevitably had to remove some and reapply this because of changing light as well as Stuart washing his face in the sequence. If we were to go back to filming, I'd make it so that we kept the makeup on the entirety of the film, which would in turn add to our continuity. However, in conclusion, I believe that the makeup was a good addition. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is the costume. We used some ripped jeans, a jumper, a hat and also some trainers. I think the ripped jeans was a good idea because it makes the story more believable as he has spent all his money on drugs, so not on clothes. I also like the hat. However, there are some points that I think could be improved, e.g. the jumper we used for our main character was a breach in continuity because the jumper actually was a finisher's t-shirt for a triathlon, which doesn't fit with our character profile and that would need to be changed. As well as this, I believe that the shoes we used are a bit too sporty for the character and probably fit better with some Adidas Gazelles or Vans, which has actually been taken from Train Spotting, just plucking that out of the air. However, I think that we had a good base for our costume, we just needed some minor changes to make it perfect. For our final film, we decided to cast Stuart Tanner as Stuart, Chloe Ellis as Lily, and finally Rory Purdy as Blake. Lily was seen as the victim in our film, which fits with the typical conventions of a thriller film, as she is vulnerable and also female, which is stereotypically seen as being weaker than men. I really like this because it is typical for thriller films. Another character we used was Blake. Blake was a hooded figure that attacked and supposedly killed Lily. He was in an all-black costume, which connotes to the audience that he's the villain of the film. As well as this, he's portrayed as being tough, not afraid to kill anyone. I like this aspect of our film because it, again, fits with the conventions. However, if I could go back, I would maybe put him in there for longer to make him come across even more, because we had a cross-cut between the two stories. In our production, we've used some social groups and have stereotyped them in ways we saw fit. For example, our protagonist Stuart is a heroin addict. He's represented in a negative light. This is shown in our film by the costume, connoting he spends little money on clothes, leading us to believe that he has spent all his money on drugs. Also, the setting where the character is introduced is untidy, bottles everywhere, clothes on the floor. Also, his phone has been smashed. This leads us to believe that he can't be bothered to tidy and get his phone repaired, which therefore puts a stereotype on heroin addicts as being lazy. Another way drug addicts have been represented is being unemployed, which would suggest that he is in the E bracket of the social economic classification, giving him a lower status. This can also be represented in Danny Boyle's Train Spotting, which also represents drug addicts as being lower class and reckless. I think the overall representation of this group is well put forward, as many people would agree with this. Another one of our characters is Blake, played by Rory Purdy. The representation of a male, mid-20s. He's seen as the villain in the production according to the conventions of media. The fact that he's male also contributes to the typical conventions. The character's violent persona suggests that all men of this age are violent, representing them in a negative light. This is a stereotype that he's been labelled on the age bracket for men, portraying them as being violent and reckless. The character supports this, although it may not be true in reality. Again, I like this aspect, however, I think that we could have pushed the boat out and used some out of the ordinary, making our production more unique. The third and final character I'm going to be analysing is Lily, the victim in our production. She has been represented in a weak and vulnerable light. This is typically shown as female, which is stereotypically associated with vulnerability, e.g. she's not able to look after herself and things like that. In terms of props character theory, this character is the damsel in distress and needs saving from the villain. Personally, I think that it'd be more fitting if we included a male victim, because I think this has made the murder seem less random and more associated with drug crime, which would stereotypically be more linked to men and give our film some more context. A way we could consider to distribute our film would be through a large conglomerate such as Walt Disney Company or Times Warner. This could be publicly distributed. This would be a good example of vertical integration. However, this would be very unlikely because the budget of our film was so small that this would mean that vertical and horizontal integration would not be possible. As well as our budget being so small, it would be very financially punishing to use celluloid, as it costs £1,000 per reel. As an alternative to this, we could use digital media platforms such as YouTube, as it's free to use, meaning our budget would not be affected by our distribution. However, if we do decide to distribute our film using this method, it's highly unlikely that we get as many people viewing the film. However, we could use social media to advertise our film, such as Twitter, Facebook, which again is free to use. Therefore, I think that we would distribute our film through YouTube and share it on social media and online streaming. Another advantage of this is that with celluloid, over a period of time, quality does begin to actually decline. Whereas digital platforms, they will stay perfect every time you play them. Instead of using a large conglomerate, another method of distribution would be through private distribution in Britain. For example, E1 is a British distribution company that would have distributed films such as I, Daniel Blake. This would be good to use because it would be marketed to a niche audience, and they would expect our film, because it was set in England with English characters, and they'd also distribute when large conglomerate films are also distributing, because they have different audiences, so they can do that. Our film would be cast as a niche because many thriller films are, and also the subject of our film is not classic fairy tale story which would appeal to more mainstream audiences. This is because it's about drugs and crime, and there are not many films out there that are based on drugs and crime. Also, some people would find it quite disturbing to go and watch a film because of the nature, because it's about drugs, which is undesirable, and it's also why our target audience is aimed at this level. According to the BBFC age rating, Envision would rank the 15-year-old bracket as well as this with the inclusion of alcohol and drugs, the consumption of the substances. This age rating would be suitable. As well as this, murder is also in our production, which might upset younger viewers. However, we believe that the main target audience would be men in their mid-20s to 40s. This is because our protagonist Stuart is around that age himself, and he would make people the same age more interested in our production. Our production is predominantly targeted at males due to figures about this kind of topic and how men are twice more likely to watch a film that involves drugs than women. However, if a woman was facing the same problems as Stuart was experiencing, it would make them more motivated to go and watch the film. To attract our audience, we use some techniques that we have viewed previously while looking for inspiration for our film. We decided to use a cliffhanger ending. We decided that our main character would come across a body and then stop, which leaves the audience with unanswered questions in their head that they'll want to answer. E.g., who was a hooded figure? This will engage the audience and they'll want to know more. This is why they'll go and watch the film, to actually see it. They hook you in, if you would like to say it that way. As well as this, many other thriller films openings will leave you on a cliffhanger, e.g. Goodfellas. As well as this, we made our main character relatable to the target audience. For example, middle-aged men are more likely to go and view the film. It's about their generation compared to teenage girls who'd be unable to relate to Stuart because they haven't experienced that generation. However, boys roughly the same age will be drawn because they will want to find more about the story of someone their own age, as well as this. A younger audience will be drawn because they will want to see what the older generations are like. As well as this, drugs and crime will appeal more to this audience because they're more intrigued. We also picked the music in our film according to the target audience. We decided to use contrapuntal music because that was similar to previous successful series called Fargo. This was also aimed at the target audience that we aspire to have. Because the series is successful, we decided to use the same style to attract the target audience. During the production, distribution and exhibition process of our production, there's been a number of platforms and forms of tech that we had to learn to use. For example, learning to use Blogger and a high-tech camera, and also learning how to use Premiere Pro to edit our trailer. During the filming process, we had to learn the ropes of being able to use a DSLR camera. I discovered that once you have learned how everything works, it's pretty easy to use, and found that later any mistakes that you have made can be cut in the editing process. I've also discovered that there are some camera shots that can be more effective, like a tracking shot, and is more interesting than a mid shot. We also used a GoPro, which was perfect for the under the car shot. Another technology that we used was an editing software called Premiere Pro on an Apple Mac. This was very high quality, and we used it to edit our films, such as it's been used to edit films such as Deadpool and The Social Network, which are two very good films. We decided that this would be the right tool to use because it's, as well as being effective, it's also quite easy to use once you get the hang of it. Premiere Pro was a key tool in the production of our film, and a lot of our film needed editing to make it seem more effective to the audience. For example, a perfect example of this would be when Stuart has awoken and is still tripping on heroin. For this we changed the colour correction. We also made our film go in slow motion. This was to create an effect to make the audience more aware that he's been taking drugs. I took inspiration for this from the music video, Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High by the Arctic Monkeys, another very good song. We also used various colour corrections in the film to make our film look duller on a day that actually was quite bright, which didn't really fit with the conventions of thriller, so we did change that. We also changed the filter from colour to black and white, which we used during the dream in our film. In conclusion, we definitely made the right decision with the editing software. After completing our production and looking back on our preliminary task, I think there's definitely been some massive improvements that we've done. For example, we gained a greater understanding of camera shots and how they can be utilised so that they have the most effect. For example, in our preliminary task, we had to use many tracking shots, which made our film a bit too amateur. So for our final film, we decided to use a tripod for a scene where we wanted the camera to be steady. However, we also tried to use a reverse dolly shot towards the end of the sequence, but inevitably cut because we believed that the camera was too shaky and it wasn't good enough to make it into our final film. We also used a wider range of shots, such as a worm's eye view and a Dutch tilt, which all in all improved the quality of our production. During the production of our preliminary task, there were some aspects of mise-en-scène that we decided to alter in our final film. For example, in our preliminary task we did not use specific costumes for characters, which would have been unprofessional for our final film, so we decided to change that because it gives the film more of a backstory and a greater understanding of the character. As well as this, the story was not very clear on the role, whether it was a worker or a managerial role, which was then another reason why we adapted this. The costumes that we went with were much more suited to our characters, which definitely improved the quality of our film. Props were also used, which was a key aspect of our production. In our preliminary, we did not utilise this, as we only used a few minor props, which we changed in our final film because we had some more significant props, such as a large knife and also a car, and many other props that we used in our film. The narrative of our film, the narrative was also basic, and we did not think about what it was going to be, e.g. we had a worker walking to a manager's office and being fired, and then walking out, which looking back on is pretty poor storyline that we did not hook the audience in, whereas in our production we spent a good amount of time brainstorming before deciding on a final plot. We decided that a more complex narrative would draw a greater audience. This is why we decided to use a plot about drug addicts dreaming about a murder, then finding the body in real life. And I think this made our film better and increased the professionalism of our film and JCR Studios in a whole.